Hello, thank you for coming into session 2. We are going to have a lot of fun in this. This is a highly interactive session. And so welcome. My name is Melodie Lopez. I'm Hopi, Navajo, and Pueblo. I am the owner of Indigenous Strategies, and I do a great deal of listening. That's actually a big part of what I do. I love this picture I put on here today. This is actually me listening to young leaders from high school and the local colleges. And I do a lot of work with young people. I engage them in discussions on climate and on what they can do and let them become leaders where I just listen to them. So a little bit about me. I know some of you may have seen me as a moderator from the last session, but I actually am not a climate scientist. Surprise. I'm a behavioral scientist. Like I saw my colleague yesterday, I'm your token behavioral scientist today. And I received my master's in social welfare from UC Berkeley. And social welfare is really an interesting field. It's taken me into several spaces, including one of working a lot with scientists in science communication. In looking at working with tribes, listening is great. Active listening is really more what you want to move towards. And so we're going to explore different ways to do that. Don't worry if the screen freezes. Excuse me, what's very important is that we do some listening. So I want to begin, like I begin all things, with an acknowledgement of where I'm at. This is really important for me. I'm coming to you from Tucson, Arizona, and this is the traditional homelands of the Dana Atam people and the contemporary homelands of Pascagoyaki tribe. I have a lot of cohorts here from the University of Arizona, and that land itself in the 1880s was land that had about 8-9 different tribes, including Apaches, Kokopah, just indigenous tribes from all over. So, you know, we're all very much connected in this land. And I think what's important when I give a land acknowledgement statement is that because I occupy this land, a lot of what I do is responsive to the tribes from here. So I'm fortunate enough to work with the Wak Atam at the San Javier district, and I work a lot with Pascagoyaki tribe. That's part of the land acknowledgement, is the people of the land and responding to what it is they need to have happen in the way they would like it to occur. So we are going to be using Mentimeter. The question that's in front of you now is, what aspect of sovereignty did you learn the most about during session 1? So you have an ability to choose between political, indigenous data sovereignty, and the sovereignty of nature. So go ahead and connect, and you can choose. Now, I know for some of you, it's going to be hard to choose which one is it that you really want. Maybe you learned about 2 things. I allowed, you can go ahead and put in 2 answers. So I won't make you choose just one. So I think that a lot of people think because they're hearing something that it's actually listening. Hearing is an activity that is sound-based. I work for the Arizona School for the Deaf and Blind, and those students often have a lot of difficulty with hearing. They have different abilities to hear. And I have a picture right up here of the students at a drum. Students have to learn to listen in different ways. Often they have to listen by touching the drum and understanding vibrations in the air. And to me, sometimes that's what hearing is about that. Active listening, instead, it requires focus, intention. One must be motivated to really want to hear the information that's presented to them. So there's different definitions of active listening. And active listening really, like I said, requires a specific intention to concentrate and then response and remember what's being said. It's really about understanding the underlying message behind what people are saying. And I think that that's a very different definition than Indigenous understanding of active listening. For Indigenous people, active listening would really encompass giving and sharing the gift of time. I've often been told that the gift of time is unique because it's something that can't ever be replaced. Time is precious. And so when you go into these meetings with tribal partners, you need to know that even if it's in a formal setting, that's really their gift of time to you. And what they're doing, whether they're sharing data and statistics, that's still a form of storytelling, which is something you heard from session 1. And so that's important. Words are sacred. So I'm mixed. I'm Hopi, I'm Navajo, I'm Pueblo. And all of my grandparents had the same message for me in regards to speaking. And that was choosing words carefully, being intentional, because breath is sacred. And so when you're speaking, you're bringing something about. So even right now, even with the technical difficulties and everything else going on, I'm sharing with you. I'm sharing my sacred breath and these words in hopes that we can really talk about listening. Or excuse me, I can talk about listening and you can listen. So in that, in the workbook, you'll see that whenever you have a meeting, food is very important, and sometimes gifts are important. It can be little things. It can be swag from your business, anything that is an exchange, because exchanging that is really important. So by doing active listening, what you do is you also strengthen your own patience, which again, everyone is sharing right now, is we're sharing a lot of patience with this Zoom call. And it's great. When you find yourself being a patient listener, what you do is you really give the other person a chance to express themselves fully. And that's a wonderful thing when communicating and collaborating with tribes. Sometimes you may notice we have a pause. So even in facilitating our panel, we pause. We look at each other for cues. It's very typical to allow that pause. Make sure people are finished speaking. That's a really good method. So I have a little exercise. And because we don't have slides, we're going to use chat because we still can communicate in a two-way method here. So I want to tell you a story about the power of water. And after I finish my story, I'm going to give you a cue, and then you get to finish up the story in maybe like one quick sentence, and you put in chat how you think this story should end. All right. So as I begin the story, I need to let you know that water in the Sonoran Desert is very special. We have different types of rain here. We have soft and gentle rains. Sometimes we call those female rains. And we have big, giant monsoon downpours. Sometimes we call those the male rains. We get so excited in Arizona when it starts to rain. We step out of our homes and our apartments. We bring our children to the door to witness our rains. It gets very, very exciting. So that's how we feel about water out here in the Sonoran Desert. Another thing you need to know about our water is that we understand it not only comes and exists above us from our clouds, but it exists below us as well in our watersheds. So if you come to Tucson, you're going to drive on an overpass, and it's going to say Relito River or Pantano Wash. And if you're a visitor, you're going to look at that, and what you're going to see are beautiful sandy areas that have trees and shrubbery. Those areas fill up during our monsoon cycles. It creates beautiful, thunderous, rapidly flowing water. It's really fantastic. But pretty soon after that, our water returns back into the earth, and it recharges those underground water tables. So after years of these underwater tables being depleted, the Santa Cruz River began to recharge, and some of the springs close to the San Javier district had begun to return. Water was returning back from the earth. Oh my goodness, it was so exciting. I was able to visit that spring, and I wore my moccasins intentionally. I wanted to feel the texture of the ground underneath, because I walked outside and it was hard packed. And then as I began to get closer to the river areas, the ground became looser and sandier, and I felt it underneath my feet. And then we were getting closer and closer to the springs. And oh my gosh, the flowers, they were all blooming. It was beautiful. I got distracted, and I started looking at the flowers, and I stopped noticing where I was stepping in my beautiful shiny moccasins. And then suddenly I found myself, okay, participants, finish the story. What happened next? Use your chat feature and share with us. That's right. How does that end? Janet, first one. I found myself in the water. Very nice. Look at you splashing in the water. I think you have a good sense of my personality. Stepping into the mud, and I began to sink in. Oh, stuck in the mud. I found myself as a salamander walking along the shore. You are awesome. Look at you, knee deep in the stream. Stepped in the water and my moccasins were soaked. Oh, yes. Somebody put going for a swim. Blessed by the water. Yes. Yes. This is a lot of active listening. When I hear all of you giving your responses, they're the same, but they're all really different. Cleansed and feeling closer to our ancestors. Stepping into a pothole of water. Bending over the water. This is great. Throwing handfuls of water back into the air. Yes, yes. You know, as you type into the chat, I'm going to let you know, I actually kind of sideways stepped into a little place where my foot got stuck into a muddy space, and I was in the spring itself, is what actually happened. And it was delightful. And yes, my moccasin was soaked. Hopi moccasins are white, and that's perfectly fine because they're meant to get wet. And thank you. Thank you for your responses and participating through this. All of your answers really show me that you're all different types of listeners. And there are 4 different types of listeners I want to touch upon. And so there's your informational listener. When informational listeners listen to a story or a report, they're there to understand the new concepts. They're there to hear the technical jargon and think, okay, I'm going to understand what's going to be presented today. So I'm going to give the example of traditional ecological knowledge, TEK. So with TEK, an informational listener says, aha, traditional ecological knowledge is TEK. When I hear those words, I understand it refers to that concept. Okay, that's your informational listener. So you have also appreciative listeners. Appreciative listeners, the message itself and the jargon is not so important. They're there to hear and kind of experience the speaker. Sometimes this is shaped by a previous interaction with the speaker. So if there's anyone there who's heard me before, they're like, yes, I'm going to listen to session 2 because Melodie's a great storyteller and she's very animated with her hands. And so they're there to appreciate what they're hearing. Often they're attracted by a presentation style that they really enjoy. Kind of think of TED Talks with your appreciative listeners. So that's a person who comes to hear about TEK. Like, oh, I can't wait to hear about TEK today. That's an appreciative listener. Now we also have reflective listeners. Reflective listeners are more of an emotional type. It's a relationship listener. It's about a listener who wants to process the feelings and emotions of a speaker. So I'm going to kind of touch back a little bit on some of your responses. People who have reflective listening habits, you tend to establish deep connections with your speaker. Sometimes you use nonverbal cues, which I'll discuss in a minute, and that's how you show your attentiveness. So these people are like, oh, I really appreciate the idea of traditional ecological knowledge because you shared it with me. And so there's that connection. And then lastly, there's also an empathetic listener. And by the way, there's several of them. I'm just kind of picking up what I was looking at in this audience. I'm by trade a therapist, so I tend to be very empathetic in my listening when I'm working. And so this is a person who tries to understand the point of view of a speaker. Often they'll put themselves in those shoes, which you all did to a certain extent. Literally, you put yourself in my moccasins, traveling along a waterway, and you were trying to experience it. I kind of took you into an experience where you had an opportunity to understand empathetic speaking. So an empathetic person begins to feel connected to the concept of traditional ecological knowledge because they understand how important it is to a speaker. All of those listening, truth is, we all have a little piece of all of those, and we can be each of them at the same time. So I just want to share that there are different types of speakers. In chat, if you want to spend a moment, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write in the 4 different types of speakers: informational, appreciative, reflective, and empathetic. And I want you to type in, what kind of listener do you feel you are? And this is in the context of meeting with new tribal partners or just other connections you need to make. What kind of listener are you? You could even think in the context of this workshop, which has been super crazy with the technology, right? You're still being able to identify. I think it's important when you know what kind of listener you are, because then you can build on your skill towards being more of an active listener. Chances are everyone here has some active listening skills. I love this. I'm looking here. Oh, some of you are even combining. Yes, you know you're informational and empathetic. You're reflective and appreciative. Look at, try to be all the above. Yes, try to be all the above. I hear you. And yes, some people said it depends on the speaker. Absolutely right. In starting relationships with your tribal partners, I would ask you to examine your role in how you're going to listen to them. If you are naturally an informational listener, it's going to take a little bit more active listening skills for you because it's going to be a different way to connect with tribal communities. They're giving you an opportunity to really form a relationship and build trust. The slide that I do not have for you is really talking about the benefits of active listening, because there are several, but the biggest one is getting trust in your partner. This is true of all partners, but especially with tribal partners. There's a very different kind of storytelling in Indian country. We can be very, very circular. It can actually take an hour or so to get to the point you might be looking for. Sometimes you might think we're talking about something entirely different, then we circle back and respond to the question that was asked. So for informational speakers who are looking to understand jargon and a main message, it can be a little trickier. Oh, hey, thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate you. So another thing that active listening does is it broadens the perspective of the listener because it gives you a chance to see something from an entirely different belief system. As you heard, even the little chat we had in session 1 about all our relations, human and non-human relations, we find that agencies will talk about resources, but Indigenous people will see sacred elements. So, you know, yesterday there was this really wonderful pairings. There was like the fire team and the water team. And then they also had a biodiversity team, which I'm like, ooh, there's fire, water, and earth. What's the 4th team? Well, the 4th team was the planning team. I went, oh, air! And I got so excited because that I thought planning means you're talking and exchanging ideas, and that's that sacred breath of air. So I was like, that's so wonderful. So I didn't even see it as separate planning teams. I saw them as speaking through elements. So another thing active listening does is it helps you kind of cue in to where a miscommunication might arise. It helps you nip problems in the bud. If you're being very attentive to what your tribal partner is saying, you might be able to catch up certain flaws, certain lack of understandings, and be able to express them in a different way earlier on. So I mentioned nonverbal communication, and I want to acknowledge we're on Zoom. So Zoom has some really tricky nonverbal communication. Since I work at the School for the Deaf and Blind, I have to be big on nonverbal communication. I have to do a lot of head nods. I understand. I may not even say I understand. I just this. If I don't like what a student's saying, that's if I'm being sarcastic. So there's a lot of gestures I make. Try when you're on Zoom, try to stay with the same face. If you're one of those people that's always smiley, I'm kind of smiley. I'm like that. I'll smile through the whole meeting. And if you're really listening, be attentive. I know it's very difficult. This sometimes causes our Zoom fatigue because we're being so attentive. But especially the tribal partner, Don't do one of these where you're looking down. And if you have two screens, don't be typing like this, because in a Zoom atmosphere, that appears very disrespectful. And I know we're all multitasking. I totally get this, but try to watch your appearance. And if you're talking, it's fine to look down at your papers. But you know what? We also know when you bend down to get the phone and you start texting. So try to do your best to be very attentive non-verbally on your Zoom meetings. In person, you don't need to worry about expression so much, except to actually show your attention without speaking as much as possible. Watch your body language. What is your body telling these people? Are you listening and opening up? Are you closing in and scrutinizing? Are you just looking another direction when you're annoyed? Everybody cues into those nonverbal cues. So a good active listener will be really attentive to what their body is saying. So that's a verbal way of handling it. There's also several nonverbal responses that you can give, or verbal responses you can give. But I want to caution you. When responding to tribal partners, unless they're asking a direct question to you, I want you to think briefly. Do I need to respond? That's kind of a giant thing. I was listening to a really great workshop from an Alaska Native woman, and she even suggests maybe count to 10. Inside, take a deep breath, count to 10, and think, do I need to respond? Often in academia, we do find that there is a need to show verbal appreciation of what it is we're sharing. But with tribal partners, that isn't as necessary. The listening is often much more important, especially in early relationships, so much more important. So a quick thing you can do is a brief verbal affirmation. A brief verbal affirmation is, I appreciate what you've just told me. That's a really powerful statement and very short. It touches on that Indigenous concept of giving a gift. It signals appreciation for time. I think that's one way to go. I'm seeing some chat, and I will get to your questions. I'm going to try to wrap up in about 5 minutes. And so brief affirmations are really great ways of showing how you can respond to a tribe. Make sure your questions are relevant. Often you're given a great deal of information. Try to remember why you're there. It's so easy to get tangential. When you're around amazing people, like frankly, all the panelists through each and every day, it's really easy to go off on a tangent. So remember being relevant. What did the speaker just tell you? Respond to that. You may often wish to paraphrase using some of the words they have used if you understand those words. Because if you don't understand, it's okay to ask for a clarifying question. So when you say personhood, does that mean? Ask your question. Those are always perfectly, when you're an active listener, it's always okay to ask a clarifying question. In many ways, it's much better to do that before you start paraphrasing. When you ask questions, try to do your best to leave them open-ended. Open-ended questions give a speaker a greater chance to expand on what they're saying. So again, you're showing kind of a greater appreciation for what it is that they have to say. And so those are kind of some helpful hints to being an active listener. I have to apologize again. I had a little bit more activities for us, but instead I feel like I really want to respond to some of the things that are in chat, because I think it's super important to try to give you these tips. Right now it's a free-for-all. I really want you to feel like you can ask me anything. And I love some of these questions. So there's a question about, I look down when I'm taking notes. I think it's perfectly fine in chat or in person if you have a chance to say, I'm taking notes right now, so I'm looking away from the camera. I think it's fine because, again, you're communicating here. I'm listening, but I'm taking notes right now. So that's a fine thing to do, to take notes and do that. Shasta, you and I, we are talkers, which is why we're closing out the session. And many people are uncomfortable for silence. I think it is tough to sometimes do that. These are really the tips for people who aren't familiar with you yet. This is what happens when you're looking to build just tribal partnerships and collaborations. So once people get to know you, we, in Indian country, we have every sort of personality. So we get to understand that, we get to understand people's ways. Sometimes you may find yourself, you might be a good one to count to 10. And if 10's too much, count to 5. You know, that can really be helpful sometimes. So, do I have tips about eye contact? Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. I have a few tips on eye contact. So here in Zoom, we really haven't had to worry about that too much. But in person, we don't want to be the person who stares directly in people's eyes. Someone mentions elders. But what you can do is you can still look around the face. And so that's perfectly fine. You can look at their shoulders. You know, you just does not eye contact. And it's fine to blink and be aware of that. It's perfectly okay to look elsewhere for a little while. You know, that's just, you're right. Sometimes it is disrespectful to make eye contact. Other people really want your eye contact. So that does vary tribe to tribe. It's the same as what I call the Indian handshake. We tend to give very soft handshakes. Some people, it's barely a touching of fingertips or a slight grasp. Other tribes, it's really a strong, firm handshake. So it's the same with eye contact. Some people really need to know that they're paying attention. This is all a part of getting to know your community. And this is taking a look at how other people are interacting in the circle you're at. So that a lot of people don't have briefs about how to be a good active listener. So one thing you can do is being aware. How are the other professionals dealing with the same thing? And there's also nothing wrong with asking. It's part of those clarifying questions that you get to that helps build that trust and establish a really good relationship. So, yes, someone was talking about going to Alaska. Slowing down. That is one of my things. I get so excited, I can talk really fast. I force myself to slow down on Zoom, especially when I work with my kiddos, because there are interpreters that have to have really, really fast fingers to interpret all that I'm saying. So hear that? Just seeing your chat made me slow down my cadence and my rhythm. So I really appreciate that. That's true, everyone. Slowing down when you speak is a really good strategy. when you are talking. And when you're listening, it also helps to have a speaker who is speaking slower so you can pick up on some of the nuances of what they're saying, what they're emphasizing in their speeches. So we have 5 minutes left in this workshop. I do have a last exercise we can try on chat. So I'm going to close out with that. Again, so I had a beautiful, actually, I have a picture behind me that's very beautiful. This is home. This is up at Hopi. And we always say that we're from the center of the world. But I noticed that other tribes, when I came here, the Dana Atam also are from the center of the world. So we all are. Everywhere we come from, we love and we prize what we have so much. It's the center of the earth. So I'm going to give a little description of the center of the world of one of my college students. And I kind of wrote down what she was saying. And then I'm going to have you all guess which part of the Southwest she's talking to. So think about what I'm saying and see if you can guess where is her center of the world. She said, you know, I never thought that I would end up in New York. I'm a desert person, and I miss hanging out with everyone back home. Thank you for asking. And yes, I did grow up in the center of the world. When I tell people here in New York that I'm from the Southwest, they seem to think that we live in windy sand dunes, like we're from some other planet. But I grew up in a beautiful, robust forest. No one even knows we have forest here. I grew up shaking pinyon trees, pinions on yummy little nuts that can be roasted. And some people use them for jewelry. My forest smelled like pine, but they were also fir and aspen trees. We use these trees for many things at home. Our forests have water. I prayed in the same streams that my mom, her mom, and all my foremothers have visited since time immemorial. Our water is sacred. When I was a teenager, there was a really bad fire. It burned through our traditional lands and my reservation. That fire changed so much. We had some serious floods, so bad. The water just went over our roads, dams, just everything. It made me really sad. But my tribe stepped up and worked with other folks so that now my tribe is helping to protect the center of the world. Okay, in 3 minutes, where is the center of this world for this individual? I dropped in a few hints, and I love it. White Mountains, Flagstaff, Northern AZ, Palomar, Jemez Mountains, White Mountains, Northern Arizona, home. Love you who just said home. That's awesome. Their community, yes, they were at their community. Apache White Mountains. It's interesting because since I said fire, a lot of you are picking places and communities that have been devastated by fire. Sedona, Mongolian Rim, Jemez Pueblo, Jemez Mountain, Havasupai. Yep. So I won't let the mystery go much longer. She's actually from Santa Clara Pueblo. And I had to change it to reservation. I know that's really not the right way to say it. I just didn't want to give it away, although clearly some of you knew it was a Pueblo. And so that was my student from Santa Clara Pueblo. And there was a fire there, I believe in 2011, that hit many Pueblos. This is just her personal story. I love that you listen. Thank you so much for being kind and patient and interacting with me in this crazy virtual environment. Everybody, enjoy your lunch break. I look forward to seeing you in session 3. Take care.